While surveying the southwest of Iran for oil, Anglo-Iranian oil company prospectors sighted an oddly geometrical-shaped hill in 1935. But it was the French archaeologists who ventured into the area for exploration and excavation. One in particular, a Russian-born French archaeologist called Roman Gershman, spent almost 10 years in the site, trying to dig out whatever was left of this great structure known today as Ziggurat Choga. Ziggurat is the term assigned to a pyramidal stepped temple tower that is an architectural and religious structure, characteristic of the major cities of Mesopotamia, now mainly in Iraq, from approximately 2200 until 500 BCE. Located near Susa in Khuzestan region of southwest Iran, Chogazanbil was a great temple built in the Elamite ancient city of Dur-Untash during the Middle Elamite period, dedicated to Inshushanak, the bull god of Susa. The square base of the ziggurat was built principally of brick and cement. It now stands only 24 meters, 80 feet, high or 2.5 levels, which is less than half its estimated original height. The complex is protected by 3 concentric walls which define the main areas of the town. The inner area is wholly taken up with the Great Ziggurat, dedicated to the main god. Building a 3D model of an ancient place is a very delicate, yet interesting task. We always start from what is remaining of the site and its existing features. These are called the primary sources. Then for what's missing, we may turn to similar structures, in our case other existing ziggurats, or depiction of the structure in remaining artifacts, which are called the secondary sources. Yet, some parts of the structure remain completely up to speculation and debate. To create these final touches, we have to rely on educated guesses and imagination, which is both a very difficult and yet amusing exercise. Unlike what people would like to see when they are looking at digital reconstruction of ancient places, these places have been full of color, artwork and statues. We often think of dusty, empty and solid spaces when we imagine these ancient sites. But have a look at existing shrines and mosques in the Middle East. We can reasonably conclude that ancient temples were nothing less in terms of cleanness, luxury and glory. What remains today of Ziggurat proves a glorious past for a structure which must have served not only as the dwelling of a respected god, but also a sanctuary and a center of unity for the common men living in the vicinity of this magnificent structure. How did Chogazanbil compare to modern structures in terms of height? Rising more than 50 meters, 174 feet, above ground, it would be slightly higher than Azadi, Shayad, Tower in Tehran, or Arc de Triomphe in Paris, or the Leaning Tower of Pisa. In the neighborhood of the ziggurat, there are several other temples and chambers, dedicated to various gods and purposes. These structures were guarded by 3 almost impenetrable sanctums or walls, each one only allowing certain individuals in, through several gates. Being the biggest structure of its kind, Ziggurat was built based on precise calculations which used the length of the bricks as its unit of measure. Each side of Ziggurat has entries which lead to the roof of the first level. But in order to reach the apex or the high temple located on the 5th level, only one of these entries had access to the higher levels. Very few people had the right to ascend to the high temple, and the spiral path towards the temple made sure they briefly circled the entire structure. Ziggurat was the pride of the Elamite king, Untash-Napirisha, and its glory, sanctity and beauty surpassed any other structure at the time, creating jealousy among all contemporary rulers. Eventually, it was destroyed by the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal in 640 BC, who jealously describes the glory of the temple and boasts about violating its secret chambers in We know that at least some parts of Ziggurat had been covered with blue or red paint. We also know there are 3 different kinds of clay used in the structure, all made from the material found in the riverbed nearby. These are raw clay, baked clay, brick, and raw clay with a mixture of broken bricks. Studies suggest the material used in the structure were once waterproof, but today, with adverse weather conditions, the structure is in danger of losing more and more of her initial essence. Decorations and statues in Ziggurat can be traced to other great ancient sites of the time as a result of the cultural exchange among these places. And being one of the capital cities of the Achaemenid dynasty, the architecture and decorations from Elam later influenced the more famous Iranian ancient palaces like Persepolis. Before Choga-Zanbil takes its pyramidal shape, the original structure is believed to have been in shape of a large square with an open courtyard in the center, a structure that is not unfamiliar in present-day Iran, such as this one in Isfahan. The structure comprised of several chambers, storage areas and temples which were used for various reasons. 2 temples dedicated to Inshushinak were among these various chambers. One could only be accessed from inside the courtyard and seems to have been restricted from public, while the other temple's entry was from outside the structure, which gave access for public entry. The entry to the outside chamber is still visible in the first level of the ziggurat. Once the construction began, inside the courtyard was filled with dirt, giving way to the construction of the 4 additional levels above. All chambers and rooms in the original structure were blocked except the one that opened outside, and they could only be accessed via stairs and openings on the roof level. The original Inshushinak temple is assumed to have been used for housing the god's statue, or possibly a replica of the statue which was later kept in the high temple. The smaller platforms inside and outside this chamber suggest the statue of the god may have been positioned temporarily in different locations in different ceremonies. We can assume these rooms have been highly decorated and strongly guarded. With the way the entrances to the various rooms within this temple are designed, one could never see beyond one room even if all the doors were open, and that is because the entry to each room makes a zigzag pathway from the entrance to the temple to the most inner section of the temple where the statue of the god, and possibly the gifts and objects dedicated to it, was kept. The structure of the temple was carefully designed so in the event of heavy rain, the surface water doesn't expose the building to any risk. Remains of the downpipes and floodways in and around the building prove that surface water management had been carefully considered. There are 2 round platforms in the southwest and northwest of the main temple structure which have been dedicated to the gods of the temple. While the original height of these platforms is not known, their application is assumed to be for various ceremonies and rituals in the temple. Used either as platforms for addressing a crowd or positioning a temporary statue, these round platforms must have played a key role in the general operation of the temple. The Ishmakarab and Kuririsha temples comprised of many smaller chambers in rooms which, based on the objects discovered during excavation, we can assume these rooms were used as personal offices, kitchens and storage areas. Although various temples on the ground within or outside the inner sanctum seem to have been accessible for a variety of people, the High Temple remains possibly the most private room not only in this monument, but also across any known civilization at the time. Evidence suggests this room was available to only a handful of people, and others would have had nothing but verbal descriptions of this temple in their own imagination. The temple must have been a carefully guarded place filled with the finest crafts and gifts from the entire country. A shrine where Inshushinak used to sit on his throne stood on the snakes, overlooking those who had the privilege to be in his presence. Elamites believed the god descends to rest on the High Temple every night and ascend to the skies the next morning. There are no physical evidence of what the High Temple might have looked like. But based on existing evidence remaining from almost similar structures, it can be concluded that the interior had been divided to at least 3 separate sections: the main temple, dedicated to Inshushinak and Napirisha, a storage area for gifts and artifacts, and eventually a cooking section for the sacrificed animals. In an era where there was always threats of wars and invasions, the Elamites must have looked at the Ziggurat also as a sanctuary, a safe place which not only guarded them against their enemies, but also a place they looked up to when they longed for immortality. Every night when they settled in their modest houses, the view of the sacred temple, high in the sky, lit up with a fire that never ran out, must have reminded them that their gods will never forget about them.